strongly believe that we want to make sure the No Child Left Behind Act continues to work. You measure every day. That's why you're successful business people. I mean, you know what your business is doing. I believe we ought to extend that same principle to our public schools and ask a simple question. Can a child read at grade level? And in order to determine that, that's why you measure. And if the answer is yes, we all say great. If the answer is no, the answer question will be, then what are you going to do about it? So the principle behind the No Child Left Behind Act is to set high standards, believe every child can learn, and measure to see if we're getting results. And Congress need not weaken such a good piece of legislation.
This idea sounds right, doesn't it? Let's ensure that our students can pass a test. Let's try to fix schools where this isn't happening. And let's pat ourselves on the back when we can achieve our goal. The problem is that not all ideas for helping actually help. Not all ideas for change actually produce significant change. And not all ideas for equal access give equal access. Let me be clear in saying that my intention was not to put down the No Child Left Behind Act, but because I am invested in our nation's primary and secondary education system. Through my work in Design for Change, my goal was and is to deconstruct the No Child Left Behind Act in a way that we can better understand where it has fallen short for our students. Today we are going to discuss the No Child Left Behind Act in two ways. One, through a breakdown of the four key aspects of the program, and then we're going to look at it through the lens of what some argue to be the lack of an ethical backbone. Let's begin by analyzing the four key aspects of the No Child Left Behind program. The No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, passed under the Bush administration, is a standards-based reform aimed at disadvantaged students. The act was schemed as a way to meet the concern of the achievement gap seen with students of poor and minority backgrounds. Now, the first component of the act is what's known as standardized testing. I know I don't have to stand here and explain to everyone what standardized testing is. We've all experienced and I'm sure loved it. While supporters claim that testing is a way to adequately measure progress, the problem critics see with this component, according to the 2012 academic article, Is No Child Left Behind Effective for All Students?, written independently by Dr. Delinda Wilson-Younger, is that standardized testing makes students taught to test, meaning a classroom is more focused on learning to pass the next test than learning for the sake of learning. We, being with our work in Design for Change, have seen this so much with our students as we've had to rearrange our schedules and work with their schedules because they're constantly having to work on practice tests, test preparation, and even weekend schooling. Now, the results of nationwide yearly standardized testing leads into the second component of the No Child Left Behind Act, academic progress. The results of standardized testing becomes a means of analyzation and scrutiny that school, teachers, and staff have to try to fit into the mold of. The problem that many, if not most, including Dr. Delinda Wilson-Younger of the previous cited article, identify in terms of academic progress is that the goals set by the No Child Left Behind Act, such as 100% proficiency by the 2013 to 2014 school year, are simply unrealistic and unattainable. Schools, especially ones that face high poverty and high minority rates, face pressure to cut out, focus less on, or fund independently their non-essentials, meaning their classes like arts, foreign languages, and physical education, to attempt to ensure that these kids are test ready. The fact is, though, that according to an informative article on the No Child Left Behind Act by the research website Education Week, as of 2010, 38% of schools failed to make their annual yearly progress. And since then, state and government officials have refused to move their benchmarks, have requested or passed waivers from the No Child Left Behind, and are fighting to reshape and even get rid of the law. So what happens when the No Child Left Behind Act report card comes in and it doesn't look good? Well, just like a child may get punished for bad grades, the third component of the act enforces that schools and districts that are categorized as failing face penalties. Now, the idea of a penalty for a school that's failing seems fair and even needed to maintain true accountability, but a penalty becomes less of a penalty and more of a looming threat for schools in lower income environments that are struggling just to keep up. William J. Mathis of the Great Lakes Center for Education Research and Practice writes in his 2010 research article, The Adequacy and Effectiveness of Adequate Yearly Progress, that subpopulations of students, such as lower income, minority, and special education, their test scores are disaggregated and judged separately. That means that these subpopulations, which are expected to achieve equal proficiency and hit that 100% mark, just like the rest of the other students, are scored separately. If they fail, regardless of the outcome of all the other students in the school is identified as failing. The threat of penalties, such as unending sanctions, is very real for many schools in the U.S. Going back to the Education Week informative article, it states that many states were in fear of as many as 50% failure rates in 2011. Now, the No Child Left Behind Act is supposed to give more flexibility and autonomy to schools and districts, but this looming threat of failing does the opposite. Now, the last component of the No Child Left Behind Act has to do with funding. Funding for schools in itself is a very controversial topic, but with the No Child Left Behind Act, critics overwhelmingly have pointed to the lack of adequate funding for schools as just another reason why mastery for all students is unrealistic. Schools that need more funding have to face additional hurdles and are not getting it, and this creates the circular issue of failing and being sanctioned and then failing again. Now, if you point your attention to this chart up here by the National Education Association in 2006, it shows you that the amount of money that the No Child Left Behind Act promised, the amount of money that the president promised, and then the actual amount of money given does not match up. In fact, it's significantly and consistently lower. As we know that we can't throw money at the issue and expect it to change, but there has to be a level of commitment and investment for something to work. Additionally, government programs funding passed under the No Child Left Behind Act and included the research and reading-based Reading First program. They've been drastically cut during its implementation. So now that we can see that the major components of the act are problematic, let's discuss why critics have deemed the No Child Left Behind Act as void of ethical merit. Ethical decisions in government are based on the presumptions that the laws will help build up a better society in the U.S. But the No Child Left Behind Act seems to have made more problems in the education system. For one, Dr. Rosanna Patella argues in the Ethics of No Child Left Behind, written for the website teaching.com, that teachers, schools, and districts have lost their autonomy to use their expertise in the best interest of their students. In her words, anxiety of being measured merely by test scores has taken away a considerable amount of freedom to the harm of students, though it was meant for good. A second ethical failure is pointed out by Dr. Patella in reference to standardized testing. Schools are not factory. These are her words exactly. Schools are not factories, and they're not identical. They are not equivalent, equally funded, or equivalently staffed. How then can it be fair to impose a standard of equivalence in an ecosystem of learning in which nothing is or truly can be standard? Now, this strong opinion reminds me of the character Mr. Gradgrind in Charles Dickens' Hard Times, who treats his students like emotionless, quantifiable objects to be passed through, not as human beings capable of love, compassion, growth, and talent waiting to be tapped into and empowered. Now, if we really think about what it means to obtain equality, we can see that Dr. Patella does have a point. The No Child Left Behind Act has created a loss of justice and equity in the education system. Now, let's be honest about this. Some of these schools may be failing, and some of these schools may be the problem. But the major systemic issue that we're seeing here is poverty, and that is debatably not being addressed by the No Child Left Behind Act. Jerry Robichaud, a professor from Minnesota State University, writes in a 2006 article, The Absence of Ethics in No Child Left Behind, for the Forum on Public Policy, that while the goal of No Child Left Behind is substantially ethical, it is not being implemented ethically because it is trying to implement solutions that overlook the reality of the problem. Once more, Charles Dickens gives us another example in Oliver Twist. Nobody doubts that charity does come from good intentions, but the hypocritical implementation through laws like the Poor Law of 1834 in England make it hard for Dickens and others to appreciate those intentions. Speaking of intentions, let me conclude by saying that once more that my intention was not to rip apart the No Child Left Behind Act. But as we've heard, intentions do not always match up with implementations. The four components of the No Child Left Behind Act, standardized testing, academic progress, penalties, and funding, each have issues that contribute to the act falling short in the U.S. In addition, its lack of ethical merit makes it appear hollow and not effective. So what's next for the education system in America? Well, maybe, just maybe, we should try to match up our intentions and our implementations. Thank you.
You went probably a minute and a half over.